The deafening roar of 140 Harley-Davidsons didn't just shake the cracked asphalt. It shattered the quiet desperation of a 10-year-old boy's life. He only wanted $1 for cleaning a dusty chrome fender. He never expected the notoriously dangerous motorcycle club to answer his silent cry for help. The blistering July sun beat down on the outskirts of Fresno, California, baking the cracked pavement until it radiated a suffocating, wavy heat. For 10-year-old Leo, the temperature was the least of his problems. His stomach had been twisting itself into painful knots since yesterday morning. The worn soles of his sneakers scuffed against the gravel parking lot of a dilapidated roadside eatery known to locals as Henderson's Diner. Leo was too thin for a boy his age. His collarbones jutted out sharply against the neckline of a faded, oversized t-shirt, and his eyes carried a heavy, exhausted shadow that belonged on the face of an old man. Back at his cramped, suffocating trailer a mile down the road, his mother, Diane, was fighting a losing battle against a severe respiratory infection. With no health insurance and her factory wages completely cut off due to her illness, their small world had entirely collapsed. The pantry was completely empty. The electricity was scheduled to be shut off by Friday. Leo had to do something. He had spent the last 2 hours wandering the diner's parking lot, desperately searching the dirt for dropped quarters or dimes. He had found nothing. Just as he was about to give up and make the long, depressing walk home empty-handed, a low, thunderous rumble vibrated through the soles of his shoes. A massive custom black Harley-Davidson panhead rolled into the parking lot. The chrome on the exhaust pipes glinted blindingly in the harsh sunlight. The rider killed the engine, leaving a heavy, metallic silence in the air. He was a mountain of a man, clad in heavy denim and a leather vest coat adorned with the unmistakable, terrifying red and white-winged death head. He was a fully patched member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Leo watched from behind a rusted dumpster as the giant man swung his heavy boots off the pegs, adjusted his dark sunglasses, and pushed his way through the diner's glass doors without looking back. Leo stepped out of his hiding spot, his eyes locked on the magnificent machine. It was a terrifyingly beautiful piece of engineering, but after miles of highway riding, a thick layer of pale, gritty dust coated the front fender and the shining chrome primary cover. An idea born of pure, unadulterated desperation flashed in the young boy's mind. He didn't have a sponge, and he didn't have soap, but he had a reasonably clean rag tucked into his back pocket, a scrap of cloth usually used to wipe the sweat from his mother's forehead. Leo approached the motorcycle with trembling hands. In the neighborhood he grew up in, you didn't touch another man's vehicle, let alone the prized possession of an outlaw biker. But the agonizing hunger pangs in his stomach drowned out his survival instincts. Gently, terrified of leaving a scratch, Leo began to buff the dust away from the chrome exhaust. He worked meticulously, his small hands moving in tight, rapid circles. He wiped down the leather seat, the handlebars, and the gleaming headlight housing. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass door of the diner swung open with a violent crash. "Hey!" a voice boomed, deep and gravelly enough to shake the dust from the awning. "Get your hands off my ride." Leo froze. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. He turned slowly to face the towering biker. Richard Reaper Hayes was an intimidating figure even among his own brothers, a veteran of the road and a man who had seen the darkest corners of the world. Reaper had a thick, graying beard, arms covered entirely in faded prison ink, and a jagged scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He stormed down the diner steps, his heavy boots crushing the gravel. "I asked what the hell you think you're doing, kid," Reaper growled, stopping inches from the trembling boy. The sheer size of the man blocked out the sun, casting a dark, imposing shadow over Leo. Leo swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run. "I was just cleaning it, sir," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It was dusty from the highway. I thought if I made it shine, you might spare $1. Just $1, sir. For a sandwich." Reaper's jaw tightened. His dark eyes, hidden behind aviator sunglasses, scanned the boy. He noticed the frayed edges of Leo's clothes, the sunken cheeks, and the desperate, terrified grip the boy had on the dirty rag. Reaper had dealt with hustlers, thieves, and street kids for decades. He knew the difference between a con and genuine, raw desperation. "You touched my bike for $1, Reaper asked, his voice losing a fraction of its thunderous edge, though still dangerously low. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what happens to people who put their hands on my property?" "I'm sorry," Leo whispered, tears finally welling in his eyes. "My mum is sick. We don't have any food. I just wanted $1. For a long, agonizing moment, the heavy silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of highway traffic. Reaper reached a massive calloused hand into the pocket of his heavy denim jeans. Leo flinched, bracing for a backhand. Instead, Reaper pulled out a thick silver money clip. He peeled off a single crisp $1 bill and held it out. Leo blinked, stunned, before tentatively reaching out and taking the dollar. "You did a good job on the chrome," Reaper muttered, his face unreadable. "What's your name?" "Leo, sir." "Where do you live, Leo?" Leo pointed down the road. "The trailer park behind the old lumber yard, number 42. Reaper didn't say another word. He turned, swung his massive frame over the leather seat of the Harley, and kicked the starter. The engine roared to life with a deafening explosion of sound. As he pulled out of the parking lot, kicking up a cloud of white dust, Leo stood frozen, clutching the single dollar bill to his chest, unaware that his small act of desperate bravery had just set a massive, unstoppable chain of events into motion. The local Hells Angels charter clubhouse was located on the industrial side of town, hidden behind a high corrugated metal fence topped with razor wire. Inside, the heavy air smelled of stale beer, motor oil, and cigarette smoke. The large main room was dimly lit by neon beer signs and the harsh overhead lights hanging above two warm pool tables. Reaper kicked the heavy steel door open and stepped inside. The low murmur of conversation instantly ceased. The brothers of the charter knew Reaper's moods better than they knew their own wives, and right now the massive biker looked profoundly disturbed. He didn't head for the pool tables, and he didn't grab a beer from the rusted cooler. He walked straight to the long, scarred wooden bar and slammed his heavy fist against the oak surface. "I need to talk to Bones," Reaper demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. From the back office emerged Jackson Bones Miller, the president of the charter. Bones was a lean, wiry man with cold blue eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He had led the chapter through turbulent times and demanded absolute loyalty. He walked over to the bar, wiping grease from his hands with a shop towel. "What's eating you, Rick?" Bones asked quietly. Reaper turned to face the room. Several other key members, including the sergeant-at-arms, a massive, bald brawler named Billy Ford, and the road captain, Tommy Henderson, gathered around. "I was out at Henderson's diner an hour ago," Reaper began, his voice rough. "Came outside to find a kid no older than 10 wiping down my primary with a dirty rag." A low groan went through the room. Billy Ford crossed his thick arms. "Tell me you didn't put a kid in the hospital, Rick." "I didn't touch him," Reaper snapped back. He was shaking like a leaf, starving, ribs showing through his shirt. He wasn't begging either. He was working. "He cleaned my bike because he wanted a single dollar to buy a sandwich for him and his sick mother." "Caught!" Reaper reached into his vest and pulled out his money clip, tossing it onto the bar with a loud clatter. "I gave him his dollar. But I looked into that kid's eyes, Bones. I looked right at him, and I saw myself 30 years ago. I saw the same dirt-poor, hungry kid who had to steal bread from the corner store just to keep his little sister from crying all night. The room fell dead silent. Reaper was not a man prone to emotional speeches. He was the chapter's heavy, the enforcer, the man who handled the ugly business. To see him visibly rattled sent a shockwave through the hardened men standing around him. "So what are you saying, Reaper?" Bones asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We're an outlaw motorcycle club, not the Salvation Army. We can't save every stray kid on the street." "I know what we are," Reaper growled, stepping closer to his president. "But we also protect our own town. And right now there's a kid a mile from here living in the dirt who had more guts than half the men I fought, stepping up to a patched angel just to earn $1. The trailer park he lives in, it's overrun by those low-level street dealers who have been trying to push product on our turf. They've been terrorizing the locals." Bones leaned against the bar, processing the information. The local street gang had been a minor thorn in their side for months, pushing boundaries and harassing the poor families in the trailer parks on the outskirts of the city. "If we ride in there," Ripper continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register, "we don't just feed the kid. We make a statement. We show those street punks that the Hells Angels own this town, and we decide who gets protected." Tommy Henderson, the road captain, slowly nodded. "A show of force. Overwhelming force. We hit the grocery store, load up the chase trucks, and we parade right through their front door." Bones looked around the room, reading the faces of his men. The strict outlaw code they lived by was brutal, but it was heavily rooted in a twisted sense of honor and loyalty. They didn't take kindly to outsiders threatening their territory, and a story about a starving boy hustling for $1 had resonated deep within the hardened hearts of men who had mostly come from broken, poverty-stricken homes themselves. "Billy," Bones finally said, breaking the heavy silence, "call the neighboring chapters. Get the nomads on the line. Call the Fresno Charter. Call Bakersfield." Billy Ford grinned, a menacing gold-toothed smile. "How many brothers you want, boss?" "All of them," Bones replied, his voice cold as ice. "I want every patched member within 100 miles here by dawn tomorrow. Tell them to bring their cuts, bring their bikes, and bring their wallets. We're going grocery shopping." The clubhouse erupted into a flurry of chaotic activity. Heavy boots pounded against the wooden floorboards as men scrambled to make phone calls. The sound of dialing rotary phones and gruff voices barking orders filled the smoky air. Reaper stepped outside onto the concrete patio, lighting a crumpled cigarette. He looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a blood-red glow over the industrial park. He took a deep drag, the smoke filling his lungs. Tomorrow, that kid wasn't just going to get $1. He was going to get an army. Dawn broke over the San Joaquin Valley, not with the gentle chirp of morning birds, but with the earth-shattering, percussive blast of raw horsepower. By 6 a.m., the perimeter of the Fresno Charter's clubhouse was completely overrun. The call had gone out across the state, and the Brotherhood had answered with terrifying speed. They came rolling in off Highway 99 in packs of 10 and 20. Wyatt Dutch Vanderwall, the imposing president of the Bakersfield Charter, led a column of 30 riders, their heavy leather cuts thick with road dust. From the north, Iron Mike Sullivan brought a contingent from Oakland, their custom choppers gleaming under the pale morning light. The air grew thick with the acrid stench of high-octane gasoline, burning oil, and stale cigarette smoke. 140 fully patched members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had assembled, transforming the quiet industrial park into a heavily fortified military encampment. Reaper stood by his panhead, holding a steaming cup of black coffee in a grease-stained styrofoam cup. He watched as Jackson Bones Miller walked out to the center of the asphalt, raising a single heavily tattooed arm. The roaring engines were immediately cut. The sudden silence that fell over the 140 hardened outlaws was deafening. "Listen up," Bones barked, his voice carrying easily across the crowd. "We got a situation on the south side. A local kid, 10 years old, living in squalor at the Sunnyside trailer park. His mother is bedridden. No food, no power, no help. Yesterday, this kid stood his ground and worked on Reaper's bike just to earn a single dollar bill. That dollar is going to buy him a lot more than a sandwich today." A low murmur of approval rippled through the ranks. "But that ain't the whole story," Bones continued, his eyes narrowing, scanning the crowd of dangerous men. "Sunnyside is currently being squeezed by a crew of low-level street dealers, punks who think they can set up shop and terrorize our backyard. Today we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We feed the boy, and we send a message to the cockroaches. Fresno belongs to the Angels." The roar of approval that followed was guttural and ferocious. Heavy boots stomped against the pavement. Bones pointed to 3 massive black Ford F-250 pickup trucks parked near the gate, the chapter's chase vehicles, usually reserved for hauling broken-down bikes. "We hit the wholesale market first," Bones ordered. "Load the trucks. I want every man digging into his pockets. Let's ride." 20 minutes later, the quiet morning routine of Gary Stevenson, the manager of a local wholesale grocery warehouse, was violently interrupted. The glass doors of his store slid open, and a sea of leather-clad giants poured into the aisles. Gary reached for the telephone, his hands shaking in sheer panic, until Reaper stepped up to the customer service counter. Reaper didn't say a word. He simply dropped a massive stack of crisp $100 bills onto the laminate counter. "We need meat, bread, canned goods, bottled water, and a new portable air conditioning unit," Reaper rumbled, his scarred face deadpan. "Keep the change." For the next hour, the bikers operated with militaristic efficiency. They cleared out entire shelves of non-perishable food, fresh produce, and sanitary supplies. They bought heavy winter blankets, boxes of children's clothing, and coolers filled with ice and fresh beef. The 3 F-250s were loaded until their heavy-duty suspensions groaned under the weight. By 9 a.m., the armada was ready. Bones and Reaper took the front of the formation. With a collective twist of the throttle, 140 Harley-Davidsons roared to life, a mechanical symphony that rattled the windows of nearby storefronts. They rode 2 abreast, a seemingly endless column of polished chrome, matte black steel, and terrifying iconography. As they merged onto the main boulevard heading south, local police cruisers pulled to the shoulders. The officers didn't intervene, they simply stopped cross-traffic, wisely allowing the massive, thundering procession to pass without interruption. The heat was already radiating off the pavement by the time they reached the dirt access road of the Sunnyside trailer park. The park was a desolate stretch of rusted single-wides, overgrown weeds, and broken chain-link fences. Near the entrance, sitting on the hoods of 2 heavily modified sedans, were 6 members of the street gang that had been terrorizing the residents. They were laughing, passing around a glass pipe, completely oblivious to the impending storm. The laughter died instantly as the ground beneath their sneakers began to violently vibrate. Around the bend came Bones and Reaper, followed by a tidal wave of 140 roaring motorcycles. The sheer volume of sound was physically oppressive. Dust plumed into the air, creating a thick brown cloud that blocked out the morning sun. The bikers didn't slow down, they rode straight toward the entrance. Fanning out with practiced precision until the gang members were completely surrounded by a tight, suffocating ring of roaring V-twins and grim, staring outlaws. The leader of the street crew, a skinny man named Jesse, dropped his pipe. It shattered on the dirt. He reached instinctively toward his waistband, but froze when Dutch Vanderwaal casually unbuttoned his leather cut, revealing a heavy Colt 45 strapped to his chest. Reaper killed his engine. The surrounding bikes idled down to a low, menacing rumble. Reaper stood up, towering over the terrified dealers. "You boys are leaving," Reaper stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of undisputed fact. "You're leaving your cars. You're leaving your product. And you're walking out of this county. If I ever see your faces near this park again, you won't walk anywhere ever again." Jesse looked around at the 140 heavily armed, heavily tattooed giants circling him. He swallowed hard, raised his hands slowly, and backed away from his sedan. Without a single word, he and his crew turned and sprinted down the dirt road, abandoning their territory in sheer terror. Bones nodded in grim satisfaction. He signaled the column forward. They had a delivery to make. Inside the suffocating heat of Trailer 42, 10-year-old Leo was sitting on a frayed, stained rug, trying to soak a rag in a bowl of lukewarm tap water. In the tiny, cramped bedroom down the narrow hall, his mother, Diane, was trapped in a fit of agonizing, wet coughing. When the low rumble began, Leo thought it was an earthquake. The cheap, thin metal walls of the trailer began to vibrate, and the few mismatched plates stacked in their kitchen sink clattered violently against one another. The roaring sound grew louder, deeper and more oppressive, until it felt as though it was directly inside Leo's chest. "Leo!" Diane cried out from the bedroom, her voice hoarse and laced with panic. "Leo, what is that? Lock the door. Don't let anyone in." She assumed the worst. The street dealers had finally come to kick them out, or worse, collect the imaginary debts they extorted from the desperate residents. Leo crept toward the front window, peeling back a corner of the yellowed plastic blinds. His breath hitched in his throat. The dirt road outside his trailer was completely blocked. An ocean of massive motorcycles stretched as far as his 10-year-old eyes could see. And right at the front, walking up the cracked concrete blocks that served as their front steps, was the giant man from the diner. The man with the scar and the winged death head on his back. Leo's hands trembled as a heavy, deliberate knock echoed through the thin metal door. "Leo!" His mother wheezed in terror. The boy took a deep breath, clutching the $1 bill he had kept folded in his pocket since yesterday. He reached up, unlatched the deadbolt, and slowly pulled the door open. Reaper stood on the porch, his massive frame blocking out the sun. Behind him stood Bones, Dutch, and a dozen other men holding massive cardboard boxes. "Morning, Leo," Reaper said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. "I brought you that sandwich." Leo stepped back, utterly speechless as the invasion began. But this was an invasion of mercy. The massive bikers filed into the tiny trailer in an organized line. They didn't speak. They simply went to work. Iron, Mike carried in the brand-new portable air conditioning unit, instantly installing it in the living room window and plugging it in. Within minutes, a blast of glorious freezing air began to circulate through the stifling metal box. Others carried in heavy boxes of dry pasta, canned soups, loaves of fresh bread, peanut butter, and cereal. They filled the empty, rusted refrigerator with fresh milk, eggs, ground beef, and vegetables. They stacked toilet paper, soap, and laundry detergent in the bathroom. Diane, wrapped in a thin, tattered sheet, dragged herself out of the bedroom, leaning heavily against the narrow hallway wall. Her sunken eyes went wide with absolute shock as she watched tattooed outlaws quietly stocking her barren pantry. What is happening?" she stammered, tears instantly spilling over her pale cheek. "Who are you people? We don't have any money. We can't pay for this." Reaper turned to her and removed his dark sunglasses, offering a respectful nod. "Ma'am, your boy here did a job for me yesterday. A good job. I owed him a bonus. All this? It's paid in full. Before Diane could protest, another man pushed his way through the front door. He was older, wearing a leather cut over a collared shirt and carrying a black leather medical bag. This was David "Doc" Harrison, a former military combat medic and a longtime associate of the Fresno chapter. "Doc," Bones said, stepping aside, "take a look at her." Doc Harrison gently guided the weeping woman to the worn couch. He pulled out a stethoscope, checked her vitals, and quickly diagnosed the severe respiratory infection that had been ravaging her body. He opened his bag, pulled out a heavy-duty course of prescription antibiotics and several inhalers, and handed them to her with strict instructions on how to use them. "This will clear out your lungs in a few days, ma'am," Doc Harrison said kindly. "Drink plenty of water. The boys brought enough to last you months." Bones walked over to the small kitchen counter and placed a thick white envelope next to the sink. Inside was $3,000 in cash collected from the pockets of 140 outlaws that morning. "That's for your back rent and your electric bill," Bones told her, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "You focus on getting healthy. Nobody in this park is going to bother you ever again. You tell the landlord, and you tell anyone else who comes knocking, that Trailer 42 is under the direct protection of the Hells Angels." Diane collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The sheer weight of her despair had been lifted in a matter of 20 minutes by the most dangerous men in California. Leo stood in the center of the room, watching the giant man who had started it all. Reaper walked over to the boy and knelt down, a difficult task for a man of his size. He looked Leo directly in the eyes. "You keep your head up, kid," Reaper rumbled softly, placing a heavy, calloused hand on the boy's thin shoulder. "You're the man of the house. You take care of your mother, you hear me? And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Might." Leo nodded, his vision blurred with tears. "Thank you, sir." Reaper stood up, tapped the boy's shoulder twice, and walked out the door. Within minutes, the 140 motorcycles fired up their engines. The deafening roar returned, but to Leo and Diane, it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a choir. The massive convoy pulled out of the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust and a completely transformed life in their wake. Years later, the Sunnyside Trailer Park would eventually be torn down, but the legend of that July morning remained. Leo grew up. He didn't become an outlaw, nor did he fall victim to the streets. He used the stability provided by that massive act of charity to finish school, eventually opening his own successful automotive repair shop in downtown Fresno. But hanging prominently behind the front counter of his shop, framed in heavy glass and polished chrome, was a single crisp $1 bill. A constant daily reminder that even in the darkest, most desperate moments of life, salvation can sometimes arrive on two wheels, accompanied by the thunderous roar of an unexpected brotherhood. If this incredible story of unlikely heroes and true brotherhood gave you chills, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic, real-life story. Drop a comment below. Would you have been brave enough to clean that biker's Harley? See you in the next video.